With this, we'll move on to our next session. Like telecom and petrol, can power also travel from one continent to another seamlessly? With an intercontinental grid powered with renewables, we can bridge the gap between power surplus and power deficit nations across the globe. An intercontinental grid is a way to make the dream of reliable power a reality sustainably. To explain this better, we'll play a video for you, followed by a fireside chat with Prateek Agarwal, MD Sterlite Power, and Amit Jain, Senior Energy Specialist, World Bank. Now let's have a look at the video.
What if we could get all our energy from renewable sources? Did you know that a single district in Rajasthan receives enough sunshine to power the entire country? If there is such an abundance of clean resources, why is more than 75% of our electricity still coming from fossil fuels? Consumption patterns change throughout the day. People consume the maximum power in the evening hours when they return home from work and turn on televisions, lights, fans, and air conditioning. However, the sun doesn't shine at night, and wind may not blow all the time. So what is the solution to this problem? At 8 p.m., while the sun has already set in India, it's still shining elsewhere in the world, for example, in Oman or Saudi Arabia or even Egypt. What if these countries could export their sunlight or their wind through large cables which connect their grid with that of India's?
One world, one sun, one grid.
A similar phenomenon has been happening in the world of telecom for decades, with more than thousands of kilometers of fiber optic already installed in the seabed. Roads, gas networks, railway lines and oil pipelines have been connecting countries to each other and creating interdependent markets for millenniums. This is an age-old idea whose time has come. When it's afternoon in India, it will produce more energy than it can consume, and this excess power can be sent to the GCC countries and all the way to Egypt, where it's still morning and their own solar farms are yet to produce. When it's evening in India and the power demand is at its peak, it can source green power from the Middle East. Such a grid interconnector would allow the entire region to benefit from renewable energy for almost the entire day and would ensure deficits in one country can be balanced by surplus in another. Let's make intercontinental grid a reality. Empowering humanity by addressing the toughest challenges of energy delivery.
Thank you for playing that video, tech team, and that's a very informative video, and that kind of sums up the entire concept of intercontinental grid, and which is one of the main topics of our discussion today. Moving on to the fireside chat, we have with us Prateek Agarwal, the MD of Sterlite Power, and we have Amit Jain from World Bank. He is a senior energy specialist. This fireside chat is going to be structured in a particular way. It will run for around half an hour, where both these speakers are going to talk about broadly covering all the three topics. But then, these topics are structured to deliberate upon the larger unfolding of the renewable energy sector, reflecting on the past, focusing on the present, and also peeking into the future. And that's how these topics are aligned. We all know that renewable energy is an opportunity for India to shine and position itself as a world leader, though it already is ranked. The country is already ranked significantly on the 4th position globally. In addition, RE is also, there's an RE imperative to mitigate climate change, and that can never be overstated. The three broad topics for this discussion will be solar parks versus the distributed renewable energy space. That's very, very topical and trending debate. In the second part, we'll talk about why and how storage can be monetized, and lastly, the concept of intercontinental grid. Can I ask Amit to start the discussion by focusing on the first topic, which is solar versus the DREs, and how the two complements work with each other, whether they complement each other or there are competing issues there, and how should India as a country look at that entire interface of the two technologies? Yeah, Amit.
Thanks, Sudhir. Sudhir, can you see me and hear me clearly?
Yes, you are clearly visible and we can hear you.
Okay. So, Pratik, welcome. Let me first confess something before we start the discussion. When Sudhir first approached me about this webinar, I was not sure if I could participate. I was nervous. The reason is you are trying to combine solar, storage, and intercontinental grid in one webinar. These are three huge topics, and I was not sure that you and me could do justice for these three topics in half an hour or 2 hour discussion. I was also thinking that Sudhir is sitting at home for the last 3 months. Probably he's going a little bit crazy, and he's trying to cover all the three topics in one webinar. Especially looking at intercontinental grid, Pratik, this is still at ideation or conceptual stage. As Mr. Kant mentioned, right now there's a roadmap or vision required by MNRE, so it will not be possible probably to have a detailed discussion of this. But then I thought about it a little bit more deeper, and I thought about my year in 2009. So, Pratik, in July 2009, I was sitting on a sand dune in Bhadla Solar Park in Rajasthan. At that point of time, I was working with Clinton Foundation for the design and development of two solar parks. One is Charanka Solar Park, and second is the Bhadla Solar Park in Rajasthan. Pratik, you won't imagine in the year 2009, the Gujarat, the Rajasthan government, and the Clinton Foundation envisaged a 1,000 gigawatt solar park in Charanka and a 3,000 megawatt solar park in Rajasthan in year 2009. And Gujarat was the first state to came up with a solar policy, and they eventually installed a 400 megawatt of Charanka solar park, and this was an expensive solar park. At that time, we had GBI, and it was about 15 to 17 rupees tariff in year 2009. But at the point I'm trying to say, Pratik, is it was the vision of building a large-scale solar park in Rajasthan and Gujarat 10 years back, which led to the foundation of National Solar Mission. And here we are, where we are discussing, we are criticizing, we are competing at 2.5 rupees per unit. So look at the journey from 15 or 17 rupees to 2.5 rupees. And here we are discussing about storage and intercontinental grid. So Pratik, I think it is vision that matters. And if India could build a solar park in year 2009, probably we can do the same thing for storage and intercontinental grid. What do you think, Pratik?
Absolutely, Amit. I think we both have a common passion for I would say the world of clean energy and energy transition. And the way you described the journey from 2009 to today, it is nothing short of miraculous. I think it's safe to say that in that 11 years, we have seen more transformation in the world of energy, perhaps since the invention of electricity itself, in terms of just the amount of technology innovation and the cost reduction, and the idea that the marginal cost of producing power can be zero. Because once you set up a plant, you pay nothing for the incremental unit. I think that's just a sea change in the world of energy and electricity. Yes, I think the idea of having gigawatts of solar energy in 2009 was perhaps even more incredible and incredulous than the idea of having storage and intercontinental grids in 2020, because the technology for what we're discussing already exists, whether it is storage or intercontinental grids. But the technology for solar was very, very nascent in 2009 in terms of the cost, and still there was vision for that. So I agree with you. I think very much so. This is something which is, I wouldn't even call it a dream. I would say it's a good vision, grand vision. But if we can do it, if we could do solar parks and we could do solar today at, I think, almost 65, 70 gigawatt, including the under construction projects, soon to achieve a 100 gigawatt mission, and then 450 gigawatts soon. I'm sure the storage and the other ideas will follow.
Thanks, Pratik. I also thought, since we are on this topic of solar park, I'll share one more story with you before we move on to probably rooftop, which is where the future lies, I think. So in my 10 years of experience, Pratik, I have been associated with 4 solar parks, Charanka, Bhadla, and Mandsaur, and now Rewa Solar Park in Madhya Pradesh. So all of them have their own design issues and challenges. I thought I'll share one example with you of Rewa Solar Park, which is very close to my heart. So when we were working with the Madhya Pradesh government on Rewa Solar Park about 3 years back, international investors used to differentiate between national projects and state projects. So international investor would bid low for NTPC or SECI projects because they would have faith in the government of India, guarantees, the payment security mechanism. So they were comfortable with the balance sheet of the central agencies. When it comes to state governments like Madhya Pradesh, international investors either did not bid for these projects, or when they bid for these projects, they used to put a premium of 50 paisa per unit on these projects. So just imagine on a 3 rupee, if you put 50 paisa, it is substantial. So we work with the Madhya Pradesh government on a 3-tier structure to bring about a bankable project in Rewa Solar Park, which is now actually completed, where the investors not only agreed to bid, but they also bid at a historic price of 2.97 rupees per unit. And the 3-tier structure was, first, there was a escrow account in which some funds were being kept in case there's a delayed payment by utilities. The investor can get it automatically. Second, a payment security mechanism was being set up with IREDA, which could come in picture if the escrow account is not happening. And finally, a state government put its balance sheet by giving a state government guarantee for Rewa Solar Park. This was first time in the history of India where a state government has put its balance sheet behind a solar park. The point I'm saying is, it is this innovation and this commitment from a state government which led to a 750 megawatt over 1400 hectares. You practically need a helicopter to see that solar park is so huge. So I believe it is this innovation which has brought India right now at 70 gigawatts of solar and wind assets, and both are utility scale.
Absolutely, Amit. Fantastic story. Let me tell you a few of my stories as well. When we started this company in 2010, we looked at the same number that Mr. Kant talked about. Right? How is it that in 2010 there's a billion people in the world without access to power? There's another billion people in the world who don't have 24/7 power. So you're talking about 2 billion people in the world, approximately, who don't have super high quality 24/7 power out of a population of 7 and something billion. And we felt this is a travesty. And we asked ourselves that what can we do to contribute? We realized that there was a lot of people who had already done a lot of innovative things in the world of energy generation. Many solar companies were already there, wind companies were there. Of course, they were transitioning. And we said that, okay, looks like this problem will get solved pretty quickly in terms of being able to generate lots and lots of power in a clean and cheap and modular fashion. However, the problem of delivering that power to the last underserved household continues to be the same problem it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because the physics hasn't changed and you have to ultimately transport these electrons over long distances. And building those projects takes a huge amount of time and effort, because it's one thing to build a solar power plant in 4 walls, another thing to build long distance linear assets across forests, urbanization, villages, and it's a different challenge altogether. So we've had some fantastic experiences in doing that. We've built more than 10 projects in India, 4 projects in Brazil. And the one thing that we focused ourselves on is how do you build these projects on schedule and ahead of schedule? The biggest problem in the energy ecosystem, one of the biggest problems, was the perennial delays in transmission. When we entered the sector, the average delay was 2.5 years. By our 4th year in this business, we were doing projects 1 or 2 months ahead of schedule. By 6th year, we had done projects 14 months ahead of schedule. And again, comes back to innovation. I'll share with you later on some stories about how a simple idea like transporting material can delay a project by 3 years. But then you bring in helicopter technologies and you can do in 3 months what it would take 3 years to transport the same material. So I think India as the land, I really believe that, you throw a challenge at a group of people and we will innovate. And I think if we can do complex projects in the mountains of Kashmir, I think we can do complex projects anywhere in the world.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, and if Amit allows me to, jump in. We're talking about this HeliCrane technology. How does it really work? And going forward, where does the future of the technology lie? Are we, in what ways are we likely to, ramp up its use in infrastructure projects?
Sure. See, the challenge with infrastructure, linear infrastructure projects are railway lines, roads, power transmission lines, and gas pipelines. That it is not difficult to build the projects, but it's very difficult to access the location where the projects are based. And some of these locations are in the middle of forests, in the middle of very dense mountains. So my example of last using helicrane was in two locations. One was in Assam and one is in Kashmir. I'll tell you about the Kashmir project, for example. This was a project to take surplus power from Punjab to Kashmir. Kashmir is short of 1,000 megawatts of power. When we went to that state in 2014, we realized that kids have started dropping out from school. We asked ourselves, why are kids dropping out from school in Kashmir when the overall India average is going up? They realized that there is such shortage of power in the evening hours in Kashmir that kids simply can't do homework. And if you can't do homework, you can't stay admitted in school. And this was something was just changed, was a life-changing moment for us. We said that if we can do something in the next 3 to 4 years to bring that surplus power of Punjab into the heart of the valley, we must go and do it. So we won a large project. And the challenge with the project was that you had to build over a 15,000-foot mountain, Pir Panjal Range. And it would take you only get 4 or 5 months in a year because balance 6 months is a snow-clad mountain and you can't access those roads. Now, if you had to ordinarily do that project in 4 years, you would need to mobilize a force of 5,000 mules. And I remember my project manager showing me a plan of how he will handle 5,000 mules. And I said, this cannot be the only way. And we went to Colorado and we realized that the world has changed and everybody in the building lines over the Rocky Mountains are using helicranes. So we managed to get a crew of helicranes and this was operated by Gulf War veterans. And they did in 2.5 months what would have taken us 1.5 years or 2 years to do, just moving 3,000 to 4,000 tons of metal bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain. So just imagine it takes normally 4 weeks to assemble a tower manually, and they can do it in 2 hours. 2 hours. So these are so if I now take a step back and ask myself, how is all this relevant to the discussion today, right? Today we are here to say that how are we going to reach this clean energy 450 gigawatt target? And by the way, which will put India in a very different pedestal in terms of contribution to COP21 and the global sustainable goals. Well, if I ask developers in India and around the world, and I've traveled all over the world, including the United States, what are your top challenges of delivering renewable energy projects? The top 2 challenges always are land and transmission around the world. Now, the way we will solve transmission is through innovation like the one I described. If you have to build renewable energy in 18 months, you have to build transmission in 18 months. And you can't do it unless you completely change the way things are done. And that's what we learned. And to come back to your question, I think helicrane is a fantastic technology, but there are many more technologies. There's extensive usage of drones. There's extensive usage of algorithm software that can route the line in a way that you have lesser risk in that line. And I think there's a lot of headway left in that part of the energy ecosystem. Back to you.
Okay. Yeah, Amit, please go ahead.
Thanks, Pratik. Can I borrow the helicrane for one day? I'm going to install a 4.6 kilowatt on my rooftop. And in COVID times, I want to go for no-touch installations. If you can borrow only for one day. Can we put that on record for you?
Hopefully, I'll give you a drone for that. You won't need a helicrane.
Let me add also one more challenge, Pratik, which you mentioned a very interesting thing about transmission. When I was referring to Rewa Solar Park and the risk I mentioned was mostly for off-taker risk, right? The DISCOMs doesn't pay on time or they default. So we usually take care of the off-taker risk. But the transmission risk is usually subdued and it's not highlighted when we go for discussions with the investors. As I mentioned, in all these 4 solar parks, solar park can be built in 6 to 9 months, but transmission you require 18 to 24 months. So there's a natural gap between the transmission and the solar panels installations, and usually transmission is not highlighted as a risk, which is the case as you rightly mentioned. There's one more risk, Pratik, in this, which is, as Mr. Kant also was mentioning, right now we have 70 gigawatts of solar and wind assets. 65 gigawatts are utility scale assets. 10 megawatts plus. The decentralized assets are only 5 to 6 gigawatts against a target of 40 gigawatts. So we cannot achieve this 450 gigawatt goal until the decentralized energy comes into picture in terms of captive, in terms of rooftop. That's how Germany has done. That's how California has done. And we are really challenged on that front. As World Bank, we have a program with SBI of 7,000 crores, which is doing very well. But the point is, we have to go beyond the commercial and industrial sector to MSME, to the residential sector, where the real Bharat lies. India is not Delhi and Mumbai. India is the tier 2 cities. Pune is one of them, where most of the MSMEs are. And this is the MSME sector. Either they don't have the credit history, or even if they have the credit history, it is not good enough for lenders to give them money. So if you were following what finance minister has recently given SOPs to MSME sector in the form of credit guarantee mechanism, which eases the working capital and the liquidity for MSMEs. I believe if the government can come up with a similar scheme for solar rooftop for MSME sector, because it's natural, they are paying 7 to 10 rupees tariff, they have large modular roofs, even if they install 25 to 100 kilowatts per MSME, there's a significant loss, they can savings in their bills, and the business model makes a clear sense. So I believe, again, to meet the 450 gigawatt goal, you need innovative solutions like credit mechanism to kickstart the MSME market.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing to that, Amit. I think if you look at the spectrum of sizes that we're discussing, at one end is rooftop, which is in kilowatt hours, and then we talk about gigawatt hours at the solar park. I also believe that in between, which is between the 1 megawatt and the 50 megawatt peak, is also a huge opportunity which has been untapped. And I'll tell you why. We have a very large distribution and sub-transmission network in the country. At any point of time, there is surplus capacity available at various substations across the country. And unfortunately, we are not utilizing that extra capacity, because if you think about it, you have free transmission. You have surplus capacity available already in that substation, let's say 20 megawatt, 40 megawatt. I remember Telangana or AP came out with one tender like this, which was based on distribution substations. I think that's a very important thing to do, because you have today in the grid connected mega projects, unfortunately, the cost of transmission is not becoming visible. The cost of transmission is getting socialized across a large pool, and we all know somebody pays for it. There is no free lunch. But at the sub-transmission substation level, I believe there should be gigawatts of capacity available, and I encourage more and more states should be doing those types of tenders, which can connect into these substations and not have any incremental transmission costs. My second point on this is slightly controversial. I don't know if everybody in the audience will agree, but I think this period of giving free transmission to ISTS producers, I think it was a fantastic idea to get the country into the 30 megawatt category and become a global leader. But we must accept that this is a distortion of the pricing in the market. So I think it is important that if we want developers, like in the Western world, when a developer is citing a project, he or she is keeping in mind the transmission cost of that project, and the transmission cost is different in different parts of the country, which is dependent on the marginal cost of transmission. So you price that into your project, and then you cite your project depending on where you get a better total delivered cost to the grid. And I hope that post 22 expiry of this scheme, India will begin to cite its transmission solar projects in a way that is much more better utilization of the transmission grid.
Very interesting, Prateek. Let me further dissect the controversial point which you mentioned. You're absolutely right. There are two problems with the socialization. One, the solar and wind. We are all big fans of solar and wind, but we know that the capacity factor is only 15%. If you have a dedicated transmission line, you're only using it for 15%. And then secondly, a thumb rule says that a transmission line costs about 2 rupees per unit. So if my solar PPA is at 2.5 or 3 rupees, logically I should add 2 rupees on top of that to justify this socialized cost what you were mentioning. But let's connect this what you said to round the clock, because that answers your question to some extent. Now, recently, the largest company in India bid for 400 megawatts as 3.6 LCOE at 80% CUF. So there we are, at least we are getting rid of the problem of 15% CUF, because now we have 80% CUF, much more than thermal. So solar is no longer infirm; it becomes firm now. And then socialization can be even more easy, because I'm going to use my transmission line 80% of the time. So 3.6 rupees is actually 3.6 rupees. I won't add 2 rupees on top of that. So I think storage with solar and wind with hybrid is the next breakthrough. Storage is what solar was 10 years back. I wish the prices come down, as Mr. Kant was mentioning, from 1,000 to 180 to 100, and probably even lower than that in coming years. So if we follow that trajectory, I think future belongs to round the clock in the country. But I will bring back to again the topic that round the clock on utility scale is happening, but it has to happen at a decentralized level, where when I install solar rooftop, I install with storage so that it makes sense for me.
Absolutely.
See, one of the things that I wanted to understand, Amir, on this point is that so it's good to talk about storage, particularly in the context of rooftop and round the clock tenders like this. But can you tell us what is going to be the likely trend in in the cost of it? So, for example, a large part of the cost is going to be battery cost, and that battery cost is ultimately going to be, at least to some extent and for some more time to come, it's going to be lithium ion. So do we know, are there any indications of where is that cost headed, let's say over the next few years, so that we can have a, we can draw an inference of, the overall cost combined of solar plus storage, where is it likely to be?
So let's try to decode round the clock to answer your question, Sudhir. 400 megawatts, that's 80% capacity utilization factor. It means when you do back of the envelope calculations, you need to install 1600 megawatts of solar and wind on the ground and 1600 megawatt hours of storage. So you will have to oversize your plant 4 times. Plus, you will also have to have storage 4 times higher to have the 80% capacity utilization factor. However, many distribution utilities like Delhi pays 6 rupees tariff for purchasing of power from the market. So 3.6 rupees at 80% is still much cheaper than many discoms are buying from the market. So storage prices have come down tremendously, which are reflected in this RTC tender. Now, in 2009 and 10, it was about $1,100 per kilowatt hour, and now today it has fallen to $150 to $180. And as Mr. Kant was mentioning, 2023, these are numbers from Lawrence Berkeley and Enrel. It will fall further to $100 per kilowatt hour. Even a small country like Maldives, Sudhir, we are working to install large-scale storage because of this falling prices. So the trajectory with solar took 10 years, probably storage will take only 2 to 3 years before it becomes a reality.
Just to add a point on storage, I spent some time in the United States looking at what are they doing, and participated in some storage related opportunities. And we saw that some of the leading sunshine states like California and Arizona actually have a very interesting storage policy, which is decoupled from generation. They're treating storage as a transmission asset. And when I thought about this, I felt, oh my God, this makes so much sense, right? If you were producing, let's take an example of farming. If you were producing wheat in Punjab and you had to design grain storage facility, would you put the grain storage facility in Punjab? Or would you put it in the national highway that connects Punjab with Chennai, so that any point of time, wherever there's a shortage, you can quickly take the grains out and give it to that part of the country? I think very clearly the answer is the latter. And that's exactly what California and Arizona are doing. They're saying that storage is a grid asset. There will be standalone grid connected storage all over the important nodes in the state or the country. And any point of time, the grid operator can absorb the power into the batteries and can release the power. What this does is, instead of that storage only serving one generator, it is now serving anybody on the grid who has surplus power or needs to absorb the power. And they find that the returns on that capacity utilization is obviously much higher. This is another area that I believe India should look at the transmission level and the distribution level of having standalone storage facility, just like you have warehousing facility in or any other product.
Exactly, Prateek. So you can see sunshine on my face right now, and this is 4 p.m. in Delhi. But even at 7 p.m., we will get the same sunshine over here in India. So 300 days of sunshine, not only in India, but also South Asia, Southeast Asia. If we don't utilize this free source and store it in the storage at the household level, I think we are losing a big opportunity.
Absolutely. No, and the last point on storage, I mean, I spent on that same trip, I spent about 2 days meeting startups in California that are working only on battery technology. And I think we haven't yet seen what the ultimate battery technology of choice will be. Just like solar evolved from thin film to PV, CSP, and multiple things came, and ultimately, I think it's safe to say we have settled at PV. I think the battery technology itself is going to evolve. We are definitely, lithium ion is dominating the world today. But the amount of research I have seen in terms of polymer composite electrolytes and various things, one can't imagine, some that are packing huge amount of energy density for aviation use, some that can have very long holding capacity and a very good, very low cost per kilowatt hour. So I think this is something that evolves. And I agree, however, that one thing that I agree for sure is that the cost curve in storage will be steeper than the cost curve in solar, which is incredible because we started this conversation talking about the cost curve in solar, which itself is incredible. And just imagine what can happen in storage.
So talking about the cost curve in solar, I think let's move on to the last part of this debate where we have to discuss the intercontinental grid. And there, the cost curve of solar is the key factor, right? There's a lot of discussion about how what would be the cost estimate of this entire project. But before getting onto all of that, and Amit can talk more about it, I want to understand, Prateek, if you can help us understand what exactly is the concept all about, right? It's a very fascinating project. It's a very fascinating topic or initiative, whatever you call it. There's a lot of interest from people to understand how will it work, right? We just had a video where we showed briefly, how it's going to work. It will utilize the time zone difference. But what is the learning that we have from the similar projects that may have come up in other parts of the world? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, Sudhir. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. We're very passionate about it here at Sterlite Power, and you saw the video we created. It's a short video. Maybe we'll upload it on YouTube for our viewers to watch as well. The basic concept is very simple. The problem statement here is that people are consuming electricity at a particular time in the day. For India, it happens to be 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the evening. That is when people are returning. The average Indian is coming home from work, putting on TV, putting on AC, putting on the fan. And at that time, however, your sun is definitely not shining anywhere in the country, and your wind may or may not be blowing. So we've talked about batteries as one solution to that. But another solution to that problem is, well, it is the wind is the sun is shining somewhere else in the world and not too far away. It's probably shining somewhere in the GCC. It's definitely shining somewhere in Northern Africa. Now, what if you could connect these two grids together with a fat pipe, which would mean that when sun is shining in these countries, India can import power. And in the afternoon time, when India is producing 450 gigawatts of solar, it's possible that it will have a lot of surplus power to sell to different markets who are not producing at that point of time. It could be, again, in the west, where it is early morning, or it could be in the east, where it is late evening. So this is the idea of an intercontinental grid, right? How does one country which has the shining sun export its sun or its wind to other countries and vice versa? That's the fundamental concept. Having said that, this is not a new concept because energy trade from country to country, continent to continent has been happening for many, many years. There are oil and gas pipelines all the way from Europe to Central Asia. There are fiber optic links pretty much from any part of the world to any other part of the world. So the only thing that has changed today is that the pricing for the technology, both of the substation technology, HVDC technology, and the cabling technology, which will be required under the seabed, all of that has reduced dramatically because of volumes and because of R&D. making this project a lot more viable today. And so that is the essence of the idea. And our video talked about perhaps the phase 1 of such a project, which is a link from Oman to Porbandar. We chose Porbandar because it's the birthplace of our father of our country, but also it is the closest point between India and Oman, and so it reduces the length of the cable. And we feel very honestly, if the government wants to, this project can be done in a short time of 2.5 to 3 years. Because, as you know, there isn't any land acquisition to be done in a project like this, which is always the hard part of any transmission project. And we believe that the costing is there. Solar power, the last tender I saw in Oman or in the GCC is already at about ₹1 in dollar equivalent terms. And perhaps even if you had to add ₹2 for the first project, because the first project will be expensive and then it'll come down, you're still talking about a delivered power of ₹3 at 7 or 8 p.m., which is when you want it. So I think, and then when you start looking at the additional benefits of load balancing, because GCC has a lot of gas, so you could use that to balance the Indian grid because of the quick ramp up, ramp down times. There are multiple benefits of this. The last thing I will say is that already there are places in the world, especially in Europe. UK is connected to continental Europe through multiple links, all owned by the private sector. Some are with France, some are with Netherlands. The entire North Sea has a virtual grid in the seabed connecting the offshore onto the onshore. And there are some very ambitious projects from Israel to Cyprus and things like that. So the technology exists, the vision exists, and I think the time is right.
Amit, what is your sense of this concept? And I would particularly like to understand your views on both the policy side of it and the financing side of it. What are typically the financing challenges that come up with projects like this? And what can the government do, according to you, from a policy or the regulatory side of things to ensure smooth delivery or implementation of this project?
So, Sudhir, if you see, India is currently importing $250 billion of fossil fuels, mostly on oil, diesel, and thermal coal annually. So if we can really look to develop these sustainable energy exports through the One World, One Cell initiative, we can improve the current account deficit and reduce the import pressures on the Indian budget. And as Prateek was mentioning, see, look at the existing examples. The technology for high voltage direct current, HVDC, is already happening. The North Sea cable, what Prateek mentioned, between Norway and UK, it is a 1400 megawatt cable connecting both the countries, a 730-kilometer connection, and it is due for completion in 2021. So this is happening as we speak. This is real. There was news recently where there are plans to connect Australia to Singapore by a 6 to 10 gigawatts of solar park with storage, 1500 kilometers line. So this is also a plan in works, So, and Europe is already interconnected. So this is not something new which we are discussing. There has been some instances on a regional level which has been happening. Of course, the One Sun, One World is a global concept which has now been initiated by MNRE. And to answer your question about the financing and the regulatory aspects, the roadmap and the vision document what MNRE wants to bring about will actually look at these aspects on geopolitical side, on financing side, and also from a regulatory side, because here we will not only talk about South Asia or Southeast Asia, we will be talking about Asia, Africa, and many continents who could be part of this grid. So the study which has been initiated by MNRE would answer these questions, what you asked, Sudhir.
Okay. Prateek, let me say you have the opportunity to end this entire discussion by letting us know what, according to you, are the larger benefits of this project, and what are some of the key learnings that we can have from the similar projects that have come up globally.
Sure, Sadiq. No, it's been. This is as we started saying. I think this project is not even as ambitious as the vision in 2009 to make India a solar capital of the world. I mean, the fact that we've achieved that, makes this project relatively more straightforward. I agree with Amit wholeheartedly. See, the benefits are obvious. I talked about the most practical time, what I call the time difference arbitrage from country to country. And I think that's a clear benefit. There is a very important grid balancing benefit, which if you talk to a grid operator, they will tell you that one of the worries of a huge amount of renewable penetration is that do we have enough sources to balance? Recently, when we had during the COVID times, with the request of the Prime Minister, we had a national for 9 minutes, and the country lost something like 35 gigawatts of load for those 9 minutes. However, it was hydro that came to the rescue of the country. Now imagine if the country is losing 100 to 200 gigawatts of load just because of cloud cover or anything like that. You have to have multiple sources, which is not possible to have in one country alone. And if you have more and more countries connected to each other, you use their sources, because when cloud is over India, it may not be over Myanmar, it may not be over Middle East. And you use those sources to balance your grid. So from a grid stability standpoint, it has massive benefits. The last thing I will say is much more at a, at a longer term, I would say almost at an emotional level. The best way to bring peace in the world is by doing more trade. And this is one more source of trade. If you are selling and buying electricity from each other, there are less chances you'll get into conflict with each other. And I think just like two countries who have all dependency on each other don't fight with each other. Similarly, countries that require each other's grid. I think India has a chance to lead the world in this, and I think we have the fantastic administration that will put this vision into motion. So those are my thoughts on this project.
Okay, so on that really positive, but I would say ambitious note, let's just bring this discussion to an end, unless you have some additional points to share. But I would say it was a very enriching discussion. We covered all the three topics properly, and particularly the aspect of the HeliGain technology, and what are the global examples of an intercontinental grid. These are some of the key takeaways from this. Thank you, Prateek, and thank you, Amit, for your valuable time. Thanks.